Hello, I'm Father George Salzman of the Harvard Catholic Center. We're here in St. Paul's Church at Bow and Arrow Streets in Cambridge. Behind me in the old altar, you'll see 12 pillars, and above the 12 columns where they flare out, called a capital, in the center of each one is the statue of an apostle. So if you sort of zero in close, you'll see the different apostles across those, and then it's 8 wide, and then facing the business school there are 4 more. So we have 12 apostles, and above each of those capitals, do you notice where there's a shield? And each of those seals above it has, in Latin, one of the 12 phrases of the Apostles' Creed. And so the apostles are the witnesses to all that Christ did and said. And so the church is built with the pillars of the apostles, the witnesses of the resurrection, with Christ himself as the cornerstone. That's what the people who built this with great sacrifice, dollar at a time, brick by brick, were anxious to impart in their wisdom and their artistry to us. Their faith, the church's faith, and our faith too. It's good to listen to the bells that they provided as well. That's not a bad thing to think of them. So this past week at Mass, we had in the Sunday first reading, it was from the Acts of the Apostles, and to replace Judas, they selected Matthias. And the reason was that they picked someone, it had to meet this criterion, that Matthias had witnessed everything from the time of John the Baptist to the ascension of the Lord. So he knew all that the Lord did and taught, and was witness to that and to his resurrection above all. And then, as it's important that there be successors to the apostles appointed, which Matthias is, and then we have them to this day, which we call our bishops. And the person who says, Clement of Rome said, it was very important that there be successors to the apostles, the bishops, because they foresaw that there could be discord. And they wanted something against that. One thing we have is scripture, another thing we have is the passing on of the tradition, and then we have the succession of bishops. Now that became really clear when there was an intractable heresy at the time of Irenaeus. And the heresy was called Gnosticism, that Indo-European root, GNO, to know. They thought they knew everything and knew strange things that Christians had not heard of. And when a Christian would say, well, I never heard of this doctrine before because it was heretical and wrong, they would say, oh, no, you're not very sharp, we're very bright, and only the cognoscenti know it, only the intelligentsia know it, you wouldn't be expected to know it. Now I ask you, pausing, however would you get around that? However would you prove that there isn't something there that the sharper people knew and you didn't? How would you get around that? And Irenaeus, Bishop of Lyon, Irenaeus, in the 2nd century, came up with a marvelous point. He said, look at the churches founded by the apostles who transmitted to those churches all they knew. There's some successors selected from those who have been so instructed. And then the succession of bishops, the apostolic succession going all the way back to the apostles. It's impossible they wouldn't know all that the apostles did and taught about all that Christ the Lord did and taught, and about the truth of his resurrection and his wonderful ascension. And so that to this day is a marvelous proof against crazy things coming. We have many examples further on in the church of how one tries to secure the apostolic tradition, but the succession of bishops, the successors of the apostles, is at the very heart of it. Tertullian, who's very much a debater and apologist, Tertullian said to heretics, he would say, well, produce your lists, produce those original records of your sect, let them unfold their rolls of their bishops rolling back all the way to the apostles. Let them show the due succession coming from the first bishop to ours. And that that argument of Irenaeus, one sees as well. The church is founded on the pillars of the apostles, with Christ himself as the cornerstone. If something happened 2 months ago, 2 blocks away, you and I can imagine that when people talk about it, gossip goes on about it, news reports happen and so on, it's entirely possible that people disagree about what happened, disagree about what was said, sometimes a grand juries and panels, sometimes a petit jury, arguments from each side by counsel, discussions from each side by witnesses, saying almost opposite things. However, is it possible that Christ, who was not a few weeks ago, but 2 millennia ago with us, in a land few of us have visited, that what he taught and said and did can be passed on so clearly to maintain the unity of the church. And so those things which maintain the sacred scripture, the tradition reverently passed on by the fathers through the centuries, and then the apostolic succession indeed. We get thinking of it with Matthias. The church built on the pillars of the apostles, and Christ himself is the cornerstone. God bless you.